Hello, welcome to another video on our channel. Here, we translate testimonies from people who have had near-death experiences and other spiritual experiences. Today, let's learn the story of Serafina McAllister. She says she had 3 NDEs and met with God, where it was revealed that He is not as the church teaches. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now. Leave a comment with your name and city. Let's now listen to Serafina's testimony. Hello, my name is Serafina McAllister. I'm here today to share with you an experience that completely changed my life and my perception of the world. I'm 59 years old now, but what I'm about to tell you happened exactly 40 years ago, when I was just 19. Back then, I was a young cadet at the United States Air Force Academy, full of dreams and ambitions. I grew up in the southern United States, in a small town where conservative traditions and customs were the norm. My father, a former Marine, was always a strict and disciplined man. He taught me from an early age to follow rules, obey orders, and never question authority. This upbringing shaped who I was, a disciplined young woman determined to be part of the armed forces. Perhaps, deep down, I was seeking my father's approval. I had a very limited view of the world and spirituality. The idea of God that was presented to me was that of a harsh and punitive being, something I feared more than I respected. But all of that changed drastically on August 28, 1983. That day, a car accident not only almost took my life, but it also opened my eyes to a reality I never imagined existed. It was during this event that I had my first near-death experience, something that would happen twice more in the following days. Today, I'm here not just to tell you what happened, but to share a message that I believe is vital for all of us. During those moments between life and death, I was taken to what I can only describe as the other side. There, I experienced something that words can barely express. I saw God, but not the God I was taught to fear. What I saw, what I felt, was a pure, absolute, and unconditional love, which forever changed my perception of everything I believed until then. This experience became my life mission. I've spent the last 40 years trying to understand, process, and ultimately share what I've learned. It wasn't an easy journey. There were moments of doubt, fear, and disbelief, both mine and others. But the certainty of what I experienced and the importance of the message I received drove me to continue. So I ask that you open your mind and your heart to what I am about to share. I'm not here to convert anyone or to impose my beliefs. I am simply here to tell my story, in the hope that it can bring comfort, hope, and perhaps a new understanding about life, death, and the unconditional love that awaits us beyond this plane of existence. August 28, 1983, began like any other day at the Air Force Academy. I woke up early, did my morning exercises, and prepared for the day's classes. The air was crisp that late summer morning in Colorado Springs, and I remember feeling a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. It was like a part of me knew something important was about to happen. After morning classes, one of the older cadets, Lucas Briggs, offered me a ride into town. Lucas was known for his charisma and popularity among the cadets, and I felt flattered by the invitation. I accepted without hesitation, ignoring a small inner voice that told me to be careful. We got into his car, a sports model that he loved to show off. At first, the conversation was light and relaxed. Lucas talked about his plans after graduation, and I shared my dreams of becoming a pilot. But as we walked further away from the gym, I noticed a subtle change in the tone of his voice. His comments started to get more personal, more invasive. Suddenly, I felt his hand on my knee. I walked away, making it clear that I was not interested in his advances. But Lucas didn't take the rejection well. His face turned red with anger, and he started to speed up the car. I tried to calm him down, asked him to slow down, but he seemed possessed by a fury that I didn't understand. It was then that everything happened in a split second. Lucas, distracted by his anger and still trying to touch me, lost control of the car on a curve. I vividly remember the screeching sound of tires skidding on the asphalt, the smell of burning rubber, and the feeling of my stomach sinking as the car began to roll over. The world spun around me in a blur of colors and sounds. I heard metal twisting, glass shattering, and felt a violent impact as I was thrown from the vehicle. For a brief moment, I felt like I was flying. Before hitting the ground with devastating force, I fell into an area covered in rocks. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. I felt like every bone in my body had been broken. I tried to move, to scream for help, but no sound came out of my mouth. My vision began to darken at the edges, and an intense cold spread through my body. As I lay there, watching my own blood spread across the stones, I had a strange, calming thought. So this is how I'm going to die. I didn't feel fear, just a deep sadness for the dreams I wouldn't fulfill, for the goodbyes I wouldn't make. The sounds around me began to become distant, as if I were submerging in deep water. My last conscious memory was of seeing the blue sky above me, so vast and beautiful. And then, darkness completely enveloped me. What happened next would forever change my understanding of life, death, and everything that exists beyond the veil of our physical reality. The transition from excruciating pain to profound peace was so sudden that, at first, I couldn't understand what was happening. A moment before, I was lying in a pool of my own blood, feeling my life slipping away. In the next instant, all pain was gone, replaced by a feeling of lightness and tranquility that I had never experienced before. I opened my eyes, or at least I thought I had, and found myself floating above the scene of the accident. It was a surreal sight. I could see my own body lying on the floor, motionless and pale. All around him, paramedics worked frantically, trying to revive me. Their movements seemed slow, as if they were moving through thick water. I didn't feel scared or panicked when I saw my own body down there. In fact, I felt a strange disconnection, as if that body was no longer me, but just a shell I had left behind. It was at that moment that I realized I was dead. Or at least, that's what I thought at the time. As I watched the scene, I noticed a soft light starting to form beside me. At first, it was just a faint glow, but it quickly intensified, becoming the brightest, most beautiful thing I had ever seen. From this light, a figure emerged that I recognized immediately, although I couldn't explain how. It was my maternal grandmother, who had died when I was very little. She smiled at me, a smile full of love and understanding. Wordlessly, she extended her hand, inviting me to follow her. I hesitated for a moment, taking one last look at my body and the paramedics still fighting to bring me back. But the love and peace that emanated from my grandmother were irresistible. I took her hand, and together we began to move toward the light. As we advanced, the world around us began to change. The scene of the accident disappeared, replaced by an environment that I can only describe as a dimension of pure light. Colors I had never seen before danced around us, and there was music. No, more than music. It was a perfect harmony that seemed to come from every direction and nowhere at the same time. It was then that I felt it, a presence so vast, so loving, so absolutely all-encompassing that I could barely comprehend it. It was God, but not the harsh, judgmental God I was taught to fear. It was pure, unconditional love, complete acceptance of who I was with all my flaws and imperfections. At that moment, my entire life flashed before my eyes. But it wasn't a trial, as many describe it. It was more like a compassionate review, where each moment was viewed through the lens of divine love. I saw how my actions affected others, for better and for worse, but there was no condemnation, only understanding and love. I felt enveloped by this love, completely accepted and forgiven. All the doubts, fears and insecurities I carried simply dissolved. For the first time in my life, I felt truly at home. My grandmother, still at my side, explained without words that I had a choice to make. I could stay there, in that place of eternal love and peace, or I could return to my body and my earthly life. There was an important mission I needed to complete, she told me, although the details were unclear at the time. The decision seemed impossible. How could I leave this place of perfect love to return to the pain and suffering of the physical world? But something inside me knew that my journey on earth was not yet over. With one last hug from my grandmother and surrounded by divine love, I felt myself being pulled back. The light began to dim, and the pain in my physical body began to be present again. I opened my eyes to see the shocked faces of the paramedics, who had just brought me back to life after several minutes of clinical death. I had returned, but nothing would be like before. The experience I had in those brief minutes would change the course of my life forever. Returning to my body was like being ripped from paradise and thrown into a sea of pain and confusion. The peace and love I had experienced was replaced by the harsh reality of my broken and injured body. I opened my eyes to see the astonished faces of the paramedics, who could hardly believe I was alive. "She's back," I heard one of them shout, his voice shaking with emotion and relief. I tried to speak, to tell them about what I had experienced, but my throat was dry and sore. All I could manage was a weak moan. The next few moments were a whirlwind of activity. I was quickly placed in an ambulance, sirens wailing as we rushed to the nearest hospital. The entire ride, I struggled to maintain consciousness, clinging to memories of what I had just experienced. I was afraid that if I closed my eyes, those precious memories would disappear like a dream at dawn. At the hospital, I was immediately taken to the operating room. My injuries were serious: multiple fractures, internal bleeding, head trauma. Doctors fought for hours to save my life. I heard snippets of their conversations, words like critical and little chance, reaching my ears as I floated between consciousness and unconsciousness. During that time, I felt torn between two worlds. Part of me longed to return to that place of peace and love that I had experienced. The other part fought fiercely to remain in this world, driven by a newfound sense of purpose. It was during surgery that I had my second near-death experience. My heart stopped beating, and I once again found myself outside my body. This time, the transition was quicker and more familiar. A mission to accomplish. Although I didn't fully understand what it meant, I felt the importance of it to the core of my being. With a sense of renewed determination, I returned to my body once again. The doctors, surprised by my sudden resurrection, redoubled their efforts. Hours later, I was finally taken to the ICU, my condition still critical but stable. The days that followed were a constant struggle. My body was broken and the doctors weren't sure if I would survive. But something inside me had fundamentally changed. I had an inner strength I didn't know before, fueled by the experience I had on the other side. Even in moments of the most intense pain, when the medications were barely taking effect, I clung to the memory of that unconditional love I had experienced. It was like a lighthouse guiding me through the darkness of my recovery. My parents were by my side constantly, their faces marked by worry and exhaustion. I wanted to tell them about my experience, to share the peace and comfort I had found. But every time I tried, words seemed inadequate, unable to capture the magnitude of what I had experienced. Slowly, day by day, I started to improve. The doctors spoke of a miracle, unable to explain my astonishing recovery, but I knew the truth. It wasn't just my determination or the doctor's skill that kept me alive. It was the purpose I had discovered, the mission I didn't yet fully understand, but felt deeply in my heart. As my body healed, my mind struggled to process everything that had happened. The memories of my near-death experience were vivid, but sometimes they felt distant, like a dream that slips through your fingers upon waking. I clung to these memories, fearing they would fade if I didn't keep them constantly in my mind. During the long nights in the ICU, when the silence was broken only by the constant beeping of the monitors, I reflected on what I had seen and felt. The unconditional love I experienced, so different from anything I had ever known on earth, made me question everything I thought I knew about God, about life, and about myself. My recovery was progressing well, and the doctors were starting to talk about moving me to a regular room. But fate, or perhaps divine plan, had other ideas. The night before I was scheduled to leave the ICU, I woke up suddenly, feeling like I couldn't breathe. My lungs had filled with fluid, a complication the doctors hadn't anticipated. Panic gripped me as I struggled to breathe. The nurses rushed to my bed, urgently calling the doctors. Once again, I felt my consciousness separating from my body. But this time, there was no fear. There was a feeling of familiarity, almost a welcome. For the third time, I found myself in the realm of light and love that I had visited before. The divine presence immediately enveloped me, bringing with it a peace that dispelled all the fear and anguish I felt moments before. My grandmother was there again, her face beaming with love and understanding. "Serafina," she said, her voice ringing not in my ears but in my entire being. "You have been brought here once again because there is something you need to fully understand before you return." It was then that I received what I can only describe as a revelation. In an instant, I understood the interconnectedness of all things, the beauty and purpose behind every moment of joy and pain in our lives. I saw that love, the unconditional love I was experiencing at that moment, was the most powerful force in the universe, the essence of everything that exists. I understood that my mission on earth was to share this truth, not through preaching or doctrine spew, but by living this love, showing people through my actions and words that there is something beyond this physical existence, something wonderful that awaits us. "Remember, Serafina," my grandmother said, "death is not the end. It is just a transition. The love you feel here exists everywhere, at all times. Your task is to help people see this, to feel this, even in the midst of the difficulties of earthly life." With those words echoing in my soul, I felt myself once again being pulled back into my body. I opened my eyes to find a medical team working frantically to stabilize me. But this time, unlike previous experiences, I felt no pain or confusion upon returning. I felt filled with a deep peace and an unshakable certainty of my purpose. In the days that followed, to the astonishment of my doctors, my recovery accelerated dramatically. It was as if every cell in my body was imbued with a new energy, a vitality that came directly from the divine source I had experienced. As I grew physically stronger, I began to share my experience with those around me. At first, they were just whispers to the nurses caring for me, words of comfort to other patients struggling with fear and pain. But soon, I realized that my story had a profound impact on people. I saw them calm down, find hope and peace as they heard about the unconditional love I had experienced. It was at that moment that I truly understood the meaning of my mission. It wasn't just about surviving the accident or recovering from my injuries. It was about bringing some of that divine love back into the world, to help heal not just bodies, but souls. In the months following my release from the hospital, I faced not only the challenge of regaining my physical health, but also the challenge of integrating my profound spiritual experience into my everyday life. The world around me seemed the same, but I had fundamentally changed. Every color seemed more vibrant, every human interaction charged with deeper meaning. My family and friends, although relieved by my recovery, had difficulty understanding the transformation I had undergone. When I tried to share my experience, I was often met with looks of confusion or concern. My father, in particular, seemed uncomfortable with my new spiritual perspectives, which diverged drastically from the traditional religious teachings we grew up with. "Serafina," he said to me one day, his voice a mix of worry and frustration, "you've been through a terrible trauma. It's normal for it to affect the way you think, but you need to come back to reality now." His words, although spoken with love, hurt me deeply. How could I make him understand that what I had experienced was more real than anything he had ever known? How could I explain that the reality he wanted me to embrace now seemed pale and incomplete compared to the truth I had glimpsed? My military career plans were naturally interrupted due to my physical injuries, but even if my body had completely recovered, I knew I couldn't go back to the life I had planned before. My perspective on the world, on the purpose of life, had radically changed. The idea of dedicating my life to a career that would potentially involve conflict and violence now seemed incompatible with the message of universal love I had received. This change of direction has caused friction not only with my family, but also with many of my former friends and colleagues. Some accused me of betraying the values we shared. Others suggested I was suffering from some kind of post-traumatic psychological disorder. His words of doubt and criticism sometimes made me question my own sanity. There were times when I wondered if everything I had experienced was just an elaborate hallucination created by an oxygen-deprived brain. But then, in the moments of stillness, when I allowed myself to close my eyes and reconnect with that feeling of unconditional love I had experienced, all doubt melted away. The truth of what I had experienced resonated in every fiber of my being, impossible to deny or forget. It was during this time of internal and external struggle that I began reaching out to others who had gone through similar experiences. Through support groups and literature about near-death experiences, I discovered I was not alone. There were others who had touched the divine and returned to tell the tale. These connections were a balm for my soul. Finally, I could share openly without fear of judgment or ridicule. The others' stories, while unique in their details, echoed the central message I had received. Love is the essence of everything, and our earthly journey is a precious opportunity to learn to live and express that love. Gradually, I began to find ways to incorporate my new understanding into my daily life. I began meditating regularly, seeking to reconnect with that sense of peace and love I had experienced. I turned to holistic healing practices, not only to continue my physical recovery, but also to learn how to channel the healing energy I now felt flowing through me. At the same time, I began to feel a calling to share my story more widely, not to convince others or impose my beliefs, but to offer hope and a different perspective on life and death. I started small, speaking at support groups and writing a blog about my journey of recovery and spiritual transformation. At first, the response was mixed. For every person who found comfort and inspiration in my words, there was another who reacted with skepticism or even hostility. I learned to accept these varying reactions with grace and understanding, always remembering the unconditional love I had experienced. Every challenge, every criticism, became an opportunity to practice this love in my everyday life. As I moved forward on this new journey, I began to realize that the true mission was not just to share my story, but to live in a way that reflected the love and understanding I had received. Every interaction, every decision, became an opportunity to bring a little more light and love into the world, continuing where I left off. But I knew the truth. It wasn't just my determination or the doctor's skill that kept me alive. It was the purpose I had discovered, the mission I didn't yet fully understand, but felt deeply in my heart. As my body healed, my mind struggled to process everything that had happened. The memories of my near-death experience were vivid, but sometimes they felt distant, like a dream that slips through your fingers upon waking. I clung to these memories, fearing they would fade if I didn't keep them constantly in my mind. During the long nights in the ICU, when the silence was broken only by the constant beeping of the monitors, I reflected on what I had seen and felt. The unconditional love I experienced, so different from anything I had ever known on earth, made me question everything I thought I knew about God, about life, and about myself. The third experience, and the final revelation. My recovery was progressing well, and the doctors were starting to talk about moving me to a regular room. But fate, or perhaps divine plan, had other ideas. The night before I was scheduled to leave the ICU, I woke up suddenly, feeling like I couldn't breathe. My lungs had filled with fluid, a complication the doctors hadn't anticipated. Panic gripped me as I struggled to breathe. The nurses rushed to my bed, urgently calling the doctors. Once again, I felt my consciousness separating from my body. But this time, there was no fear. There was a feeling of familiarity, almost a welcome. For the third time, I found myself in the realm of light and love that I had visited before. The divine presence immediately enveloped me, bringing with it a peace that dispelled all the fear and anguish I felt moments before. My grandmother was there again, her face beaming with love and understanding. "Serafina," she said, her voice ringing not in my ears but in my entire being. "You have been brought here once again because there is something you need to fully understand before you return." It was then that I received what I can only describe as a revelation. In an instant, I understood the interconnectedness of all things, the beauty and purpose behind every moment of joy and pain in our lives. I saw that love, the unconditional love I was experiencing at that moment, was the most powerful force in the universe, the essence of everything that exists. I understood that my mission on earth was to share this truth, not through preaching or doctrines, but by living this love, showing people through my actions and words that there is something beyond this physical existence, something wonderful that awaits us. "Remember, Serafina," my grandmother said, "death is not the end. It is just a transition. The love you feel here exists everywhere, at all times. Your task is to help people see this, to feel this, even in the midst of the difficulties of earthly life." With those words echoing in my soul, I felt myself once again being pulled back into my body. I opened my eyes to find a medical team working frantically to stabilize me. But this time, unlike previous experiences, I felt no pain or confusion upon returning. I felt filled with a deep peace and an unshakable certainty of my purpose. In the days that followed, to the astonishment of my doctors, my recovery accelerated dramatically. It was as if every cell in my body was imbued with a new energy, a vitality that came directly from the divine source I had experienced. As I grew physically stronger, I began to share my experience with those around me. At first, they were just whispers to the nurses caring for me, words of comfort to other patients struggling with fear and pain. But soon, I realized that my story had a profound impact on people. I saw them calm down, find hope and peace as they heard about the unconditional love I had experienced. It was at that moment that I truly understood the meaning of my mission. It wasn't just about surviving the accident or recovering from my injuries. It was about bringing some of that divine love back into the world, to help heal not just bodies, but souls. Spiritual awakening and initial challenges. In the months following my release from the hospital, I faced not only the challenge of regaining my physical health, but also the challenge of integrating my profound spiritual experience into my everyday life. The world around me seemed the same, but I had fundamentally changed. Every color seemed more vibrant, every human interaction charged with deeper meaning. My family and friends, although relieved by my recovery, had difficulty understanding the transformation I had undergone. When I tried to share my experience, I was often met with looks of confusion or concern. My father, in particular, "It's normal for it to affect the way you think, but you need to come back to reality now." His words, although spoken with love, hurt me deeply. How could I make him understand that what I had experienced was more real than anything he had ever known? How could I explain that the reality he wanted me to embrace now seemed pale and incomplete compared to the truth I had glimpsed? My military career plans were naturally interrupted due to my physical injuries, but even if my body had completely recovered, I knew I couldn't go back to the life I had planned before. My perspective on the world, on the purpose of life, had radically changed. The idea of dedicating my life to a career that would potentially involve conflict and violence now seemed incompatible with the message of universal love I had received. This change of direction has caused friction not only with my family, but also with many of my former friends and colleagues. Some accused me of betraying the values we shared. Others suggested I was suffering from some kind of post-traumatic psychological disorder. His words of doubt and criticism sometimes made me question my own sanity. There were times when I wondered if everything I had experienced was just an elaborate hallucination created by an oxygen-deprived brain. But then, in the moments of stillness, when I allowed myself to close my eyes and reconnect with that feeling of unconditional love I had experienced, all doubt melted away. The truth of what I had experienced resonated in every fiber of my being, impossible to deny or forget. It was during this time of internal and external struggle that I began reaching out to others who had gone through similar experiences. Through support groups and literature about near-death experiences, I discovered I was not alone. There were others who had touched the divine and returned to tell the tale. These connections were a balm for my soul. Finally, I could share openly without fear of judgment or ridicule. The others' stories, while unique in their details, echoed the central message I had received. Love is the essence of everything, and our earthly journey is a precious opportunity to learn to live and express that love. Gradually, I began to find ways to incorporate my new understanding into my daily life. I began meditating regularly, seeking to reconnect with that sense of peace and love I had experienced. I turned to holistic healing practices, not only to continue my physical recovery, but also to learn how to channel the healing energy I now felt flowing through me. At the same time, I began to feel a calling to share my story more widely, not to convince others or impose my beliefs, but to offer hope and a different perspective on life and death. I started small, speaking at support groups and writing a blog about my journey of recovery and spiritual transformation. At first, the response was mixed. For every person who found comfort and inspiration in my words, there was another who reacted with skepticism or even hostility. I learned to accept these varying reactions with grace and understanding, always remembering the unconditional love I had experienced. Every challenge, every criticism, became an opportunity to practice this love in my everyday life. As I moved forward on this new journey, I began to realize that the true mission was not just to share my story, but to live in a way that reflected the love and understanding I had received. Every interaction, every decision, became an opportunity to bring a little more light and love into the world. Unraveling memory blocks. In the years following the accident, as I struggled to integrate my spiritual experience into my everyday life, I faced an unexpected challenge. Large parts of my memory seemed to be blocked. I vividly remembered the unconditional love I had experienced, the sense of peace and purpose, but the specific details of the accident and my near-death experiences seemed shrouded in fog. At first, I attributed this lack of clarity to the physical trauma I had suffered. After all, my brain had undergone a significant shock, but as time passed and my physical health stabilized, the persistence of these memory blocks began to deeply bother me. It was only 19 years after the accident, when I was already 38, that the memories began to return in all their clarity and impact. The trigger was unexpected. I was watching a documentary about near-death experiences when, suddenly, it was as if a floodgate opened in my mind. The memories flooded my consciousness with an overwhelming intensity. I saw again, with crystal clarity, every moment of the accident. The look of anger on Lucas's face, the sound of metal twisting, the feeling of being thrown out of the car. I relived every second of my 3 near-death experiences, every nuance of the divine love I had experienced, every word exchanged with my grandmother in the realm beyond life. The force of these memories left me stunned. I spent days processing everything, crying, laughing, marveling at the richness and depth of what I had experienced and somehow temporarily forgotten. I then realized that my mind had blocked these memories as a protective mechanism. The experience had been so profound, so transformative, that my being needed time to fully integrate it. It was as if my subconscious had stored these memories in a safe vault, releasing them only when I was truly ready to deal with their full meaning and implications. With the return of these memories, I felt reborn once again. Everything I had learned and experienced in the 19 years since the accident took on a new dimension, a new depth. The lessons I had internalized, the changes I had made in my life, it all made even more sense now. I realized that even during the years when memories were blocked, the essence of my experience, the unconditional love, the interconnectedness of all things, the transitory nature of death, had guided my actions and decisions. It was as if my soul remembered what my conscious mind had temporarily forgotten. This awakening of memories brought with it a new wave of challenges. I had to revisit many of the emotional and spiritual struggles I had faced immediately after the accident. But this time, I was equipped with years of personal growth and a deeper understanding of myself and my purpose. I began writing extensively, documenting every detail of my experiences that I could now remember so clearly. This writing process became both therapeutic and revelatory. I discovered nuances and connections that I hadn't noticed before, further deepening my understanding of what I had experienced. At the same time, I felt a renewed sense of urgency to share my story. Now that I could remember everything so vividly, I felt more empowered than ever to convey the depth and meaning of my experience to others. I began giving talks, not only to groups interested in near-death experiences, but also in hospitals, nursing homes, and even prisons. Wherever there were people struggling with the fear of death or questioning the meaning of life, I felt called to share the message of love and hope I had received. People's reactions to my story continued to be mixed. Some found comfort and inspiration in my words. Others remained skeptical. But now, with the full extent of my memories restored, I was even more certain of the truth of my experience and the importance of sharing it. I realized that the 19 years of memory blockage had not been an obstacle, but an integral part of my journey. They gave me time to grow, to learn, to become the person I needed to be to fully carry the message I had received. Today, at 59 years old, I look back and see how each piece came together perfectly. The accident, the near-death experiences, the years of blocked memories, the sudden awakening. It was all part of a greater plan, guiding me to fulfill the mission entrusted to me in that realm of light and love. With the full return of my memories, my worldview underwent an even more profound transformation. The truths I had glimpsed during my near-death experiences took on a renewed clarity and urgency. I understood, with a certainty that transcends earthly logic, that reality is much more vast and wonderful than most of us realize in our everyday existence. The first and most fundamental truth that solidified within me was the nature of divine love. The love I experienced on the other side wasn't just a pleasant feeling or a passing emotion. It was a living force, the very essence of existence. I understood that this love permeates everything that exists, connecting every being, every particle of the universe in a web of sacred interconnection. This understanding radically changed the way I see the people around me. Where before I saw strangers, I now saw spiritual brothers and sisters, each carrying within them a spark of that same divine light that I had experienced. The differences that once seemed so important, race, religion, nationality, social status, now seemed superficial in comparison to the fundamental unity that unites us all. Another truth that became clear to me was the transitory nature of death. I realized that the fear of death, so prevalent in our society, is based on an incomplete understanding of reality. Death, far from being an end, is just a transition, a passage to another state of being. This understanding freed me from many fears and anxieties, allowing me to live more fully in the present. My perception of time has also changed drastically. During my near-death experiences, I experienced a sense of eternity, where past, present, and future seemed to coexist. It made me realize how precious and sacred the moments we live here on Earth are. Every interaction, every breath, became an opportunity to experience and express divine love. The idea of divine judgment, which had been such a central part of my religious upbringing, was completely transformed. What I experienced was not a judgmental God ready to punish our failures, but a loving presence that accepts us unconditionally, understanding that our struggles and mistakes are an integral part of our journey of spiritual growth. This new understanding has led me to approach my own life and the lives of others with much more compassion and empathy. I realize that each person is on their own unique journey of learning and growth, facing challenges that we often don't fully understand. This has inspired me to be less judgmental and more supportive in my daily interactions. My relationship with nature and the physical world has also deepened. I came to see the natural world not as something separate from us, to be conquered or explored, but as a living manifestation of the same divine energy I experienced. Every tree, every animal, every drop of water became sacred in my eyes, deserving of respect and reverence. Understanding the interconnectedness of all things has led me to a greater awareness of the consequences of my actions. I realize that every choice we make, no matter how small it may seem, has an impact on the whole. This inspired me to live in a more conscious and responsible way, always seeking to act in a way that promotes the well-being of all beings. My view of the purpose of life has also expanded enormously. I understood that we are here not only to seek our own growth and fulfillment, but to contribute to the collective evolution of consciousness. Every act of kindness, every expression of love, every moment of understanding contributes to raising the vibration of the planet as a whole. This new worldview brought significant challenges. At times, I felt out of place in a world that seemed to operate under assumptions so different from the truths I had experienced. It was painful to see people stuck in patterns of fear, conflict, and separation, knowing how unnecessary this was in light of the fundamental unity I had glimpsed. However, these challenges only strengthened my resolve to live and share the truths I had learned. I realized that my task was not to convert others to my vision, but rather to live in a way that reflected these truths, allowing others to see through my example that a different way of being and living is possible. As I integrated this new worldview more and more deeply into my everyday life, I began to notice subtle but significant changes around me. People were drawn to me, often without knowing why, feeling the peace and love I sought to radiate. Conflicts seemed to dissolve in my presence as I brought a higher perspective to situations. Today, I see my life as an ongoing opportunity to learn, grow, and share the divine love I have experienced. Each day is a new chance to bring a little more light into the world, to remind others of their true divine nature, to live in a way that honors the sacred interconnectedness of all life. This transformation in my worldview is not something that happened overnight. It is an ongoing journey, a gradual unfolding of understanding and integration, but it is a journey that I embrace with gratitude and joy, knowing that each step brings me closer to the full realization of that luminous truth that I glimpsed on the other side. The transformation I experienced after my near-death experiences was not just confined to my inner life. It manifested itself in every aspect of my existence, profoundly affecting my relationships, my career, and the way I interact with the world. One of the most significant changes occurred in my personal relationships. The unconditional love I experienced on the other side became the standard by which I began to measure all my interactions. I realized that many of the conflicts and misunderstandings we experience in our relationships come from a place of fear and separation. With this understanding, I became more patient, more understanding, and more able to see beyond superficial appearances. My relationship with my parents, which had initially been strained due to my change in perspective, gradually transformed. Although they didn't always fully understand my new beliefs, they began to see the positive changes in me. My father, who had previously been skeptical and worried, began to open up to deeper conversations about spirituality. I saw how my experience, even if indirectly, was having a transformative impact on them too. Professionally, my life took a completely different direction than I had originally planned. Instead of pursuing a military career, I felt called to work in fields that would allow me to directly share the message of love and hope I had received. I started working as a spiritual counselor, helping people who were going through existential crises or struggling with the fear of death. I also became involved in palliative care work, offering comfort and support to terminally ill people and their families. It was deeply rewarding to be able to share my experience with those facing the death transition, helping them to see that there was nothing to fear, that love awaited them on the other side. As my story became better known, I began to receive invitations to give lectures and workshops. I have spoken at conferences about near-death experiences in churches, synagogues, and spiritual centers of various traditions. I found that even though people came from different backgrounds and beliefs, the message of unconditional love and unity that I shared resonated universally. One of the most rewarding aspects of my work was seeing the impact my story had on people's lives. I received countless letters and emails from people who said my story had changed their perspective on life and death. Some reported that they lost their fear of dying. Others said they found a new purpose for living. I particularly remember a woman who approached me after a talk. She had lost her son in a car accident a few years earlier and was struggling with deep depression. After hearing my story, she told me with tears in her eyes, "For the first time since I lost my son, I feel hope. Knowing he is in a place of love gives me the strength to keep living." Moments like these constantly reminded me of the importance of sharing my experience, even when I faced skepticism or criticism. I realized I didn't need to convince everyone. If my story could bring comfort and hope to even one person, it would have been worth it. The impact of my experience extended beyond the spiritual and emotional realm. I developed a heightened sensitivity that often allowed me to feel the energy of people and places. This led me to explore energy healing practices, which I have incorporated into my counseling work. I have also become more aware of my impact on the environment. A deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all things led me to adopt a more sustainable lifestyle and get involved in environmental causes. I began to see caring for the planet as a natural extension of the divine love I had experienced. As the years passed, I noticed that the impact of my experience did not lessen, but rather deepened and expanded. Each new understanding, each new way of applying what I had learned to my everyday life, created ripples of influence that extended far beyond me. Today, at 59 years old, I look back and see a life profoundly transformed by those moments between life and death. I also see countless lives touched, in big and small ways, by the message I received. And I know, with a certainty that comes from the depths of my being, that this is just the beginning. The journey continues. The love continues to expand, and every day I am grateful for the opportunity to be a conduit for that love in the world. As I reach the end of this story, I feel deeply grateful for the opportunity to share my journey with you. 40 years have passed since that fateful day when my life changed forever, and each day since then has been an ongoing exploration of the truths I discovered on the other side. Reflecting on everything that happened, I realized that my near-death experience was much more than an isolated event. It was the beginning of a spiritual journey that continues to unfold, revealing new layers of understanding every step of the way. Every challenge I faced, every moment of doubt or difficulty, served to deepen my connection with that fundamental truth I experienced, the unconditional love that permeates all existence. One of the most important lessons I've learned is that we don't need to have a near-death experience to access this truth. The divine love I have experienced is not something distant or inaccessible. It is present here and now, in every moment, in every breath. Our task is simply to remove the barriers we have built around our hearts, allowing this love to flow freely through us. Another crucial understanding is that death, far from being something to be feared, is a natural and beautiful transition. It is a return to our true essence, an awakening to a broader and more wonderful reality than we can imagine in our physical existence. Understanding this does not lead us to devalue life, but rather to appreciate it even more deeply, recognizing each moment as a sacred opportunity to grow, love, and evolve. Over the years, many people have asked me if I am grateful for the accident that almost took my life. It's a complex question, but my answer is yes. While the trauma and pain were immense, the transformation that resulted was equally profound. I see now that that moment of crisis was actually a turning point, a catalyst for a spiritual awakening that changed the course of my life in ways I never could have imagined. For those reading this who may be going through their own moments of crisis or questioning, I want to offer these words of encouragement. Trust the journey. Even in the darkest moments, even when it feels like everything is falling apart, there is a greater purpose at work. Every challenge we face is an opportunity for growth. Every fall, a chance to rise stronger and wiser. Always remember that you are more than your physical bodies, more than your minds and emotions. You are spiritual beings having a temporary human experience. The essence of who you truly are, that divine spark that resides within each of us, is eternal and indestructible. My message for the future is simple but profound. Love. Love unconditionally. Love without fear. Love without expecting anything in return. Love is the most powerful force in the universe, capable of healing, transforming, and transcending all barriers. When we live from this place of love, we align ourselves with the true nature of reality and become channels for the divine to express itself through us. Practice compassion, not just for others, but also for yourself. Recognize that we are all on a journey of learning and growing, doing the best we can with what we know at the moment. Forgive easily, knowing that forgiveness is an act of liberation for both the one who forgives and the one who is forgiven. Cultivate gratitude for each moment, each experience, each breath. Gratitude opens our hearts and connects us more deeply to the source of divine love that permeates all existence. Always remember that death is not the end, but a transition. Live each day as if it were both your first and your last, fully embracing the precious opportunity that is earthly life. Use the time you have here to grow, to love, to make the positive difference that only you can make. As I move into my later years, I feel a peace and joy that comes from knowing that each day is an opportunity to live the truths I have discovered. My journey continues, as does each of you. And although I don't know exactly what the future holds, I know that I will be greeted, when my time comes, by the same unconditional love that I experienced so many years ago. May you all find this peace, this love, this deep understanding in your own lives. May they see the beauty and divinity in every person they meet, in every challenge they face. And may you always remember that, in the end, everything is love. This is my story, my truth, my offering to the world. May it serve as a beacon of hope and a reminder of the infinite love that awaits us all. If you enjoyed this beautiful spiritual testimony, please leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch every new video and help us spread this message to a wider audience. See you next time.